I thought the worst part of burying Daniel was watching the earth swallow his coffin. But I was wrong. The worst part came hours later, when the rain began, and I realized I wasn't welcome in my own home anymore. It was around 11 p.m. I was in the kitchen, still wearing the same black dress from the funeral, holding his favorite chipped coffee mug with both hands, the one with the faded blue glaze and the cracked handle he always refused to throw away. The house was silent, thick with grief. Then 3 hard knocks at the door. Not gentle, not hesitant, sharp, deliberate, demanding. I stood slowly, walked through the dim hallway, and opened the front door. Margaret stood on the porch, soaked from the drizzle, her long black coat buttoned up to her chin, eyes red but face unreadable. "Pack your things," she said flatly. I blinked. "Excuse me." "You're leaving. Tonight." I stared at her like she'd spoken a different language. "Margaret, Daniel just died. We just buried him." Her eyes narrowed, not in grief, but in something cold and absolute. "You were never truly my son's wife," she said, each word shaped like a blade. 7 years you lived here and gave him nothing. No child, no family, no future. This house belonged to us before you, and it'll remain ours after. She pushed past me like she owned every inch of the air. I followed her to the living room, where she dropped my old duffel bag, the same one I used when I moved in with Daniel, full of hope and foolish love. "I packed what you'll need. The rest you can get when I decide I can stand to see your face again." My hands trembled. "This is my home. Daniel and I—" "Daniel is dead," she snapped. "This house is ours." I watched her turn and walk into the hallway, slamming one door after another, making sure I felt every inch of the finality she had decided for me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. My legs barely held me up. She returned, grabbed the bag, marched to the front door, and hurled it into the puddle outside. Then she looked at me. Out. I stepped into the rain. It was cold and relentless, soaking my thin black tights and sticking my dress to my skin. Behind me, the door slammed. A second click, then a third. She had locked me out, just like that. I stood there for what felt like an hour, the weight of everything crashing down, my grief, my betrayal, my helplessness. I looked at the house, the same house where I made Daniel breakfast every Sunday, where I decorated for Christmas even when she mocked me for it, where I cried through 3 miscarriages and still tried to smile. All of it gone, reduced to a soaking wet bag in the mud. I stumbled toward the front window. Through the glass, I saw her, sitting in Daniel's favorite chair, the one he used to read in every evening, her eyes locked on the television. She didn't flinch when I knocked, didn't turn when I called her name. I was a ghost to her. I was nothing. No buses ran that late, not in Edgewood. And even if they had, where would I go? I had no family left. No one in town who could shelter me. Daniel was all I had. And now he was gone and I had been erased. I walked down the soaked sidewalk, past sleeping houses and black windows, dragging my bag behind me like a dead limb. My slippers were ruined within minutes. My hands were numb. I didn't feel anger, not yet. Only the weight of everything breaking open. By the time I reached the bus stop at the edge of town, my fingers barely worked. I collapsed onto the bench, drenched, shivering, heart hollowed out. My phone was waterlogged. No signal, no screen response, just static in my mind and static in my chest. I sat there all night under the metal shelter as headlights passed occasionally, their beams sweeping over me like I was roadkill. I couldn't cry, couldn't move, just sat there with the rain and the silence like grief had grown teeth and was gnawing me down to bone. By dawn, the rain had slowed, but my body couldn't stop trembling. It wasn't just the cold. It was the realization that I had nowhere to go, that everything I'd built over 7 years could fit into a single bag, and that bag now smelled like mildew and Margaret's cruelty. I tried once more to turn on my phone. The screen flickered, then died. I wiped it against the inside of my soaked coat, but it was useless. No one was calling. No one was waiting. The buses wouldn't start until almost 7. I just had to make it that far. I watched the sky slowly shift from black to gray, listened to the dripping from the roof, the soft squelch of my slippers when I tried to stand. I didn't even know where I was walking. I only knew I couldn't stay there, soaked and shaking, as the world started moving again. I needed to disappear before anyone saw me like that, like I didn't belong anywhere. I pulled my bag over one shoulder and started walking, step after step down the empty road. My knees ached. My skin burned from the cold. But I kept thinking of Daniel's face, how peaceful he looked at the funeral, how still. I wanted to scream at him, ask him why he let her do this to me, why he didn't prepare anything, why he didn't protect me. He promised he would. He always promised. When I finally saw the lights of a diner just past the main street, I considered walking in, but I looked down at myself, dress wrinkled and muddy, hair plastered to my face, fingers blue. They'd think I was unwell. Crazy. I kept walking. Eventually, I made it to the edge of the city and caught the first bus heading toward Albany. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have anything, really. Just a few $100s in my account, some crumpled cash in my wallet, and whatever Margaret had shoved into the bag without my say. When the bus lurched forward, I pressed my head against the cold window and stared at the trees blurring past. I should have cried, but nothing came. Only numbness. That deep, paralyzing numbness when everything you thought you knew collapses. Margaret didn't just throw me out of a house. She erased me from a life. Our life. I checked into a cheap motel just outside Albany. The kind of place that didn't ask questions, where the receptionist didn't even look up when I handed over my ID. The room smelled of bleach and something sour. The heater clanked like it was coughing up rust. But it was warm and it had a lock. I peeled off my wet clothes and stood under the shower until the water ran cold. Only then did I feel the burn on my shoulders, the scrapes on my feet, the ache in my spine. I wrapped myself in the stiff motel towel and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the duffel bag on the floor. I unzipped it slowly like it might bite me. Inside were 3 changes of clothes, none of which I liked, my old phone charger, a cracked makeup bag, and a bundle of papers Daniel had written on over the years. Grocery lists, a birthday card, nothing that mattered now. But at the very bottom, stuck between a cardigan and a scarf, was the chipped mug, his mug, the one she didn't throw out. I held it in both hands, just like the night before, and curled into myself. That was when I remembered the portrait, the wedding photo we had framed and hung over the fireplace. Daniel always said it made the place feel like a home. But in the last weeks of his life, I'd caught him staring at it, not in admiration, but with something close to fear. Once I saw him touch the frame, almost like he was checking something behind it. I'd asked him if everything was okay. He said he was just straightening it. But I remembered now the frame was always crooked, no matter how many times I adjusted it. That wasn't an accident. I sat up straighter. My heart began to pound. What if he left me something? A message? A warning? Something hidden, something she didn't find? I looked at the clock. Just past 8 a.m. If I waited a day or two, watched Margaret's routine, I could go back. Quietly. Not to beg, not to explain, but to find out what Daniel was trying to tell me before he died. Something was wrong. I felt it in my bones. And I wasn't going to let her bury whatever it was along with him. Tuesday morning came gray and cold. I waited until I was sure Margaret had left. She always went to the local market on Tuesdays, followed by her blood pressure check at the clinic. She was a creature of routine, the kind that believed sticking to the same schedule kept her in control. By 10:15 a.m., I was already on the bus back to Edgewood. I hadn't slept much the night before. My dreams were tangled. Daniel's voice, Margaret's eyes, the sound of a door slamming shut. I kept hearing Daniel say, "Don't let them take what's yours," but in my dream he never turned around to face me. When I stepped off the bus and walked up the road to her, house, my hands trembled. It felt like breaking into a crime scene. I rounded the back, careful not to make noise, and checked the window to the downstairs bathroom. Just like always, it wasn't fully latched. Daniel had promised to fix it for years, but never did. I stacked my duffel under the sill, climbed up, and pushed until the frame gave way with a groan. A cold breeze hit my face as I slipped inside, landing on the tiled floor in my socks. I stood in silence, letting the house breathe around me. No movement, just the faint ticking of the hallway clock. I crept barefoot into the living room. Everything was exactly where it had been except for me. The portrait still hung above the fireplace. Daniel and I on our wedding day, standing on the lawn behind the house, his hand resting lightly on my waist, my bouquet of white roses catching the afternoon sun. But the frame, the right side, stuck out slightly, just enough to cast an uneven shadow. My breath caught. I reached up and lifted the portrait from the hook. It was heavier than I remembered. I flipped it over and ran my fingers along the back. That's when I felt it, a lump behind the canvas. Taped. I peeled back the backing paper slowly, heart pounding in my throat. A white envelope, thick and folded, was taped to the wood with fresh, clear tape. Daniel's handwriting was on the front. Just one word. Elaine. My name. I sat down at the kitchen table, the farthest room from Margaret's bedroom, and held the envelope like it might vanish. Inside was a folded letter and something cold metal a key. It was old, tarnished, with an ornate head shaped like a twisted branch. I'd never seen it before. The letter was short, not even a full page. His handwriting was rushed, almost panicked. Elaine, if you're reading this, it means something has gone wrong. They'll try to take everything from you. Don't let them. This key opens the truth. I paused. The truth? I kept reading. My mother never accepted you. I know that. I know how she made you feel. But you're the only one I trust with this. There are things in this house we never spoke about. Things she never wanted me to know. But I found them. I know why she clings to this house so tightly. Why she was afraid of losing me. There's a room in the basement behind the far wall. She always said it was storage. It's not. The key unlocks it. Everything's there. Letters, documents, answers. If anything happens to me, don't believe a word she says. You have more right to this house than you think. I should have told you sooner. I was scared. I've always been scared of her. There was no signature, just a date, written 1 week before the day we buried him. I couldn't breathe. My hand tightened around the key. The basement, that small, dusty corner of the house I'd never questioned. She always said it was just piping and wiring, nothing important. Why hadn't I ever asked? Why hadn't Daniel shown me this when he was still alive? I looked at the front door. Time was ticking. Margaret would be home soon. I slipped the letter into my coat, pressed the key into my palm until it hurt, and returned the portrait to its place. I made sure it hung the same way, slightly crooked, just as she was used to seeing it. Then I slipped out the back door, locking it behind me. As I walked away, I glanced back once. The house loomed in the gray morning light, still and indifferent. But now, I had a key, and that meant something was about to change. 2 days later, I came back, this time with gloves, a flashlight, and nerves strung so tight they could have snapped with one wrong step. I waited behind the neighbor's shed until Margaret left again. Same coat, same grocery tote, same route. She didn't even lock the back door properly. She never expected I'd return, not after the way she threw me out. I slipped inside like a shadow. The kitchen smelled sour, like old soup and garbage. The fruit bowl on the counter was rotting. Even in grief, Margaret's bitterness found a way to rot everything it touched. I moved fast, straight to the basement door. The wooden stairs groaned beneath me, the air growing colder with every step. At the bottom, the single bulb flickered to life when I pulled the chain. I'd been down here hundreds of times over the years. It was a small, low-ceilinged room with mason jars stacked on shelves and burlap sacks of potatoes in the corner. But I had never looked at the far wall, not really. Not until now. That corner, half-shadowed and draped in cobwebs, held an old door. Brown. Scuffed. Padlocked. I never questioned it before. Margaret had told me it was where the plumbing lines were. Nothing but pipes and wires. But even now, I couldn't remember a single time I saw a plumber go through that door. I pulled the key from my coat pocket. It was cold in my palm, like it had been waiting. The lock clicked open on the first try. No resistance. Almost like someone had oiled it recently. I paused, took a breath. Then I opened the door. The air hit me like a gust from the past, musty, dry, and thick with something else. Old paper, maybe. Or memory. I flicked on the light. Another bare bulb. A small room. Wooden shelves lining all four walls. Dozens of boxes, cardboard, plastic, metal, all marked with faded ink. The kind of handwriting people used before digital anything. I stepped inside. It was warmer than I expected. Or maybe I was just burning with adrenaline. I pulled the first box down. Photographs. Black and white. A man in military uniform. A woman beside him in a wedding dress. Her face young but unmistakable. Margaret. But the man beside her. It wasn't Daniel's supposed father, George. I turned the photo over. Richard and Margaret, June 15th, 1965. Richard. The name from the letter. The real man. The man Daniel never met. The father Margaret erased. I opened another box. Letters. Bundled neatly. Dated from 1966 to 1968. I untied one and read, "Dear Margaret, I'm sorry I left. I had no choice. The debts followed me. I promise I'll return. Tell her son I love him. I read more." One after another. All signed, yours, Richard. Another box held official documents, marriage certificate, birth records, even a will. My hand froze. A notarized will, dated 1985. Richard Calloway left the house, this house, to his son, Daniel Calloway. Not Mercer. Not George's name. Daniel. My Daniel. It was all there in black and white. The house never belonged to Margaret. She lived here under a lie. She raised her son in a house that legally wasn't hers. And when Richard died, she told no one. Didn't file the will. Didn't let Daniel claim his name or his legacy. She kept it like everything else. For control. For power. For silence. I wanted to scream. Instead, I sat on the cold concrete floor and pressed the will to my chest. I needed to think. Strategize. Margaret had lived a lie for 40 years. She'd buried Daniel in that lie. And now she wanted to bury me too. But I wasn't going to let her. Not now. Not with this truth in my hands. Not with Richard's voice whispering from the boxes around me, reminding me who this house really belonged to. I stayed in that room until my legs were numb. Then I packed the most important documents into a separate box, switched off the light, locked the door from the inside, and slipped out the way I came. The moment I reached the street, the air felt different. Lighter, like something had cracked open inside me. I didn't know what Margaret would do when she realized someone had been inside. But I didn't care, because now I had what she feared most, proof. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I spread the documents out across the motel bed, lit only by the weak glow of the desk lamp, and reread every word until my eyes ached. The name, Richard Calloway, kept echoing in my mind, pulsing like a heartbeat I had never known was mine to carry. Margaret had always told Daniel that his father was George Mercer, a quiet, forgettable man who died in a car accident when Daniel was barely 5. There were no photos, no mementos, just a name she used when it suited her, then buried when it didn't. But the photos I found said otherwise. The man with sharp eyes and a military jacket was in every one of them, holding Margaret, holding a baby, holding a boy I now recognized as Daniel. And the letters, they told a story of fear, of desperation, but most of all of love. I want to come home. I miss our son. I miss you, but I can't put you both in danger. I'll fix this. I swear. He never did. Richard died of a heart attack in 1985. His death certificate was in the folder. The will he left behind was stamped, notarized, and crystal clear. The house, our house, was to go to Daniel Calloway. Not George. Not Margaret. Not anyone else. My hands shook as I folded the paper again. She'd known. All these years, Margaret had known this house wasn't hers. That Daniel had every legal right to it. But she lied. Lied so well that even Daniel believed it. Or maybe he didn't. I found more tapes, audio cassettes, each one labeled in his handwriting. I dug an old portable player from the bottom drawer of the motel room, popped in the first tape, and pressed play. The sound crackled. Then Daniel's voice, soft and hesitant, filled the room. If you're hearing this, I guess I still haven't found the courage to confront her. But I know now. I know the truth. He talked about finding the will, about reading the letters, about the guilt. She said if I tried to take the house, she'd tell people my father was a criminal, that he abandoned us, that I'd lose everything, lose you. His voice broke. I didn't want to believe her, Elaine, but I was scared. She's always scared me. I don't know why. Maybe because when she looks at me, I don't feel like a son. I feel like a possession. I had to pause the tape. The weight of it was too much. Daniel had known. For almost 2 decades, he'd lived in that house knowing it was his and pretending it wasn't. Because Margaret told him not to speak. Because she whispered lies with a mother's smile. I listened to tape after tape, his thoughts, his fears, the slow unraveling of a man stuck between loyalty and truth. And somewhere in the middle of one recording, his voice shifted. It was sharper, more certain. Elaine deserves to know. She deserves to live in that house without feeling like a guest. I'm going to tell her. I have to. But he never did. He died before the words left his mouth. I leaned back against the headboard, the cassette still turning in the player, clicking softly as the tape ended. I stared at the ceiling, numb. All those times I'd asked him why he let Margaret speak to me that way, why he never intervened. All those nights I cried because I felt invisible in my own marriage. He knew. He knew the truth and still chose silence. I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was grief, deeper than before. This wasn't just about property. It wasn't about a house or a name. It was about a man who spent his entire life afraid to claim what was his. And now, all that fear had been handed to me. But I wasn't Daniel. I wouldn't fold. I wouldn't disappear. I grabbed the folder and packed the tapes into my bag. Tomorrow I would meet with a lawyer. Not to ask, but to fight. For Daniel. For the life we were supposed to build. For everything Margaret tried to erase. The lawyer's office sat on the 3rd floor of an old brick building in downtown Albany. The kind with a squeaky elevator and windows too narrow to open. Claire Dennings was in her early 50s, sharp eyes behind simple glasses, and a voice that didn't waste time with small talk. I laid out the documents, Richard Calloway's will, the birth certificate, the notarized envelope with the seal from 1985. Her fingers moved quickly, flipping pages, scanning with practiced precision. It's all there, I said quietly. Everything that proves Daniel was the rightful heir. Claire nodded, but her mouth remained tight. It's compelling. Very compelling. But there's a catch. I leaned forward. What kind of catch? She closed the folder. According to the state, your husband never formally accepted the inheritance. Richard died in 1985. If no action was taken within 6 months of his death, the estate legally defaults to the state unless contested. But Daniel didn't know, I protested. He didn't even know the man was his father until years later. And that's what we'd have to prove, she said, calm and direct. That your husband had no knowledge of the inheritance in a legally recognizable way. That the delay was due to concealment, not negligence. I sat back, heartbeat pounding. And if we can prove that, then we file a petition to reopen the estate. But it won't be easy. Especially since, she hesitated, Margaret Mercer has already filed a claim on the house. She's asserting ownership by adverse possession, claiming she's lived there openly as the de facto owner for more than 15 years. I stared at her. She's trying to steal it. She already has, Claire said softly, and now it's on you to take it back. That night, back at the motel, I couldn't breathe. It was like standing at the base of a mountain, knowing the top was hidden in clouds, and someone up there was throwing rocks. I thought the worst had passed, that finding the will would be enough. But Margaret had moved first, filed paperwork, laid legal traps. I was already playing catch-up. Then came the phone call. It was past 9 p.m., a blocked number. I answered, thinking maybe it was Claire, but the voice wasn't hers. It was a man's. Calm, slow, too measured. Elaine Mercer? Yes. Drop the case. The house isn't worth it. I stood up, heart racing. Who is this? Click. Silence. I stared at the phone, breath caught in my throat. 30 minutes later, another call. You don't want to dig into that past. It won't end well. The voice again. Same man. Still calm. Still detached. I tried to speak, but he hung up. I called Claire immediately. They're threatening me. Someone's watching. Someone knows what I'm doing. That means you're getting close, she said. Keep a record. Write everything down. Times, dates, numbers if you can. I started keeping a journal that night. I wrote down every call, every strange car parked outside the motel, every shadow that lingered too long. Then my landlord knocked. Mr. Levington, a retired truck driver with a bad back and kind eyes. But this time he wasn't smiling. Elaine, I got a call from someone asking about your mental health. Said they were from a clinic. Wanted to know if you had any violent episodes. I didn't know what to say. My blood turned to ice. Who called you? They wouldn't say, but they asked if you screamed at night, if you talked to yourself. He looked uncomfortable. I told them you were quiet, but they sounded real official, like they had papers. I thanked him, closed the door, then locked every bolt. Margaret wasn't just trying to silence me legally. She was trying to erase me completely, frame me as unstable, push me out the same way she pushed Daniel. Slow, quiet, with poison instead of fists. I went to the local clinic the next morning and requested my full medical records. The receptionist looked at her screen and frowned. Strange, your file was accessed last week. Flagged for external review. By whom? Doesn't say. I walked out of there cold all over. I wasn't fighting a woman anymore. I was fighting a system she had wrapped around her fingers. And if I didn't act fast, I wouldn't just lose the house. I'd lose myself. The realization hit me while I was folding Daniel's medical notes on the motel bed. I remembered something he'd said 2 weeks before he died, his voice weary as he sat at the kitchen table, a full glass of water untouched in front of him. These pills feel different, he murmured. They taste off. They look lighter than usual. I had offered to get a new refill from the pharmacy, but he waved it off. Mom already picked them up. No point wasting more money. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. Just another stress-induced complaint. But now it screamed. I pulled out the receipt I'd found tucked inside one of Margaret's folders in the basement. A pharmacy name, an address in Edgewood. I went there the next morning, my hand shaking as I placed the receipt on the counter. Sorry, I think my mother-in-law was filling prescriptions here. For my husband, Daniel Mercer. The pharmacist, a woman in her 40s with a tired but kind expression, leaned forward. Oh yes, I remember Margaret. Sharp voice. Always wore that heavy brooch with a bird on it. She clicked through the computer. Yes, she picked up lisinopril for him regularly. But last month, What? I asked. She turned the screen toward herself. She also purchased aspirin cardio. 3 separate times. Not usual for someone already on lisinopril. Did she say why? Said the doctor recommended a switch. but it wasn't the same dosage, not even close. I remember because I asked her if she had a new prescription. She said it was verbal. I swallowed. With those pills, if someone took them instead of lisinopril. The pharmacist's eyes narrowed. Depending on dosage and condition, it could raise the risk of a stroke, especially if they already had blood pressure issues. I walked out of the pharmacy numb. The wind cut across my cheeks, but I didn't feel it. The puzzle was snapping into place, each piece more horrifying than the last. Margaret had replaced Daniel's meds. Slowly, silently, waiting. She didn't have to touch him, didn't have to push him downstairs or hold a pillow over his face. All she had to do was delay. Delay the right pills. Delay the ambulance. Delay her conscience. I called Dr. Harris Whitlow, the physician who signed Daniel's death certificate, and asked for a meeting. He agreed, reluctantly. "This is irregular," he said when we met at the cafe near his clinic. "But you said it's about Daniel." I showed him the notes, the receipts. I told him everything. He listened in silence, stirring his coffee but never drinking it. "I examined him that day," he said at last. "Margaret told me the seizure happened at 2:25 p.m. and that she called 911 immediately." "Did she?" I asked. He paused. "The EMS records show the call was placed at 2:51. My breath caught. That's 26 minutes. More than enough time for brain damage. Or death. And you didn't say anything?" He looked away. I wanted to. But Margaret, she's connected. "I've been practicing here for 30 years, Elaine. I have a family. I can't afford to poke bears that live in courthouses. So you let her kill him?" He flinched. I didn't know what she'd done. Still don't. But I know what I saw and what I didn't. And if you're asking me whether she hesitated to call for help, yes, I believe she did. That night, I sat in my room with a cassette player and replayed Daniel's final recording. His voice was thinner than before, slurred in places. "If anything happens to me, it's not an accident. She asked me yesterday if I'd written a will, then smiled when I said I hadn't. She thinks she's won. But I'm writing this for you, Elaine, because I know now this house, this truth, it belongs to you." I held the recorder to my chest, feeling every beat of his fear. Margaret hadn't just manipulated the law. She manipulated time, biology, and trust. She didn't kill Daniel with her hands, but she let him die. She made sure the world would call it natural. And now I had to make sure the world saw it for what it really was, murder by silence. The cemetery sat on the outskirts of Edgewood, just past the old train yard where everything smelled like rust and memory. I hadn't been back since the funeral. I couldn't bring myself to stand over the grave while Margaret hovered beside me like she owned even my grief. But now I needed to see it. To see him. I brought white chrysanthemums, his favorite. The morning was overcast, the kind of still, gray sky that made the world feel like it had stopped breathing. I walked slowly between the rows of stones, reading names that meant nothing to me, until I found his, Daniel Calloway Mercer. Except that wasn't what the plaque said. It read, "Daniel N. Mercer, beloved son." No mention of a husband. No mention of me. I knelt down, pressing my fingers against the cold bronze. The flowers Margaret left were still fresh, blood-red roses, neatly arranged. I set mine beside them, the contrast jarring. White against red, truth against pretense. She'd ordered the plaque. I remembered. Right after the service. I'd been too numb to argue. Now I saw it clearly. She'd erased me, just like she'd erased Richard. Just like she tried to erase Daniel's birthright. I whispered to the ground, "I found it, Daniel. I found everything. And I swear, I won't let her win." As I stood, movement flickered in the distance. A figure, still and dark, standing behind a tree. Watching. Margaret. I didn't approach her. I didn't need to. We both knew what this was now. A war. And I wasn't walking away from it. That afternoon, I submitted everything. The tapes. The documents. the testimony from Dr. Whitlow, even the pharmacy receipts. Claire warned me that it would be hard, nearly impossible, to overturn the court's initial ruling. She's clever, Claire said. She's lived in that house long enough to leave a shadow over every inch of it. But if we can prove neglect, that she deliberately allowed Daniel to die without aid, I nodded, then it becomes criminal. The police were slow, the court slower, but I was no longer waiting. I was fighting, and as I fought, the calls returned. You're digging into things you don't understand. He's dead. Let it go. You're mentally unstable. You're not well. I kept every voicemail, logged every time the car parked outside my window. Then one night, I caught a man trying to follow me from the bus stop. I turned and snapped a photo. The flash stunned him. He ran, but I had his face now. I gave it to the police. They did nothing. So I posted it online. That changed everything. People started asking questions. Journalists showed up. Suddenly, Margaret wasn't the quiet widow anymore. She was a woman with secrets, with power, with motive. 1 week later, someone smashed the windows of my motel room. I wasn't inside. I'd been at Claire's, reviewing legal briefs. But when I returned, the glass was everywhere, and in the center of the bed, my wedding photo. Shattered. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just picked up the broken frame, pulled out the photograph, and smoothed it gently with my hand. She could send threats. She could send men. But she couldn't unwrite the truth. The trial date was set for early spring. Claire believed we had a case, not just to reclaim the house, but to expose the full extent of Margaret's manipulation. You may not get everything, she told me, but you'll get your voice back. And that's where power starts. The day before the hearing, I returned to the house one last time. Not to confront her, just to see it. The porch still sagged. The garden was bare, but it was mine. It had always been mine. Not by birth, not by inheritance, but by truth. I stood at the gate, breathing in the sharp air. Then I walked away, not because I was giving up, but because I had already won. The truth wasn't buried anymore. It was alive, and this time it had my name on it.